So a little bit about me. I've been building and testing software for 30 plus years. I've run a couple of consulting companies focused on software development. In that time frame, for the last 17 years, I've been running Coveros. We are a boutique consulting company that improves people's software development processes, increasing agility, accelerating delivery, integrating test and security into the process. And these days, doing a lot of what I call AI-enabled development, helping integrate AI into that entire process. We are also a GitHub Premier partner and a Microsoft Innovate partner. So we do lots and lots of work on the GitHub platform, including Copilot, as we're going to talk today. And we provide everything from coaching and training across the entire spectrum of GitHub services to consulting services, helping organizations migrate to GitHub, adopt GitHub, integrate Copilot, advanced security, leverage actions, and do the other great things you can do on the GitHub platform. We also run some high-profile, award-winning conferences, including our STAR series of conferences, which are around software testing, and a new conference we started last year called AICon, which is about all things AI. So our agenda today, I'm going to talk about some of the challenges associated with adopting Copilot, and then jump right into what are some ways you can overcome these challenges going forward. I'm also going to talk about where Copilot is headed. What is the future of Copilot? Where is it going from here? And then next steps, and as Todd mentioned, if we have time, answer a few questions. You can always reach out to me as well through info@coveros.com, and I can answer your questions there too. So what is GitHub Copilot? I think most people at this point have seen Copilot in action. I will jump over and show some of its base capabilities just to level set for everyone in the audience. But it's the world's most widely adopted AI developer tool. Its goal is to maximize development or developer happiness, increase developer productivity, accelerate software development, basically make the entire software SDLC more effective. There's been some advantages that have been seen over the last couple of years as Copilot has come onto the scene. Before that, for anybody that's been a developer, you know some of these challenges mentioned here. Developer productivity across all the various tools, languages, and other things that we've used over the last 30 plus years that I've used has kind of stalled. I don't think we've seen the productivity gains that perhaps we had hoped decades ago would come from advancements in technology. And what part of the problem is that a lot of developers lose a lot of their time context switching, right? Because as we're building code, it's really hard to remember all the syntax, really hard to remember everything about development environments, all the libraries we're using, the third-party tools. And so we're often in an IDE working away, but we're switching out into other things. We're looking at requirement stocks, we're jumping into Stack Overflow, we're doing Google searches, we're doing a lot of overhead and context switching tasks. And that does take, on average, estimates are 5 hours a week at least to do that context switching alone. AI is already writing our code. There's been tools out there on the market that at least help and support us in the software development process and in our IDEs. And recently, with the advent of tools like Copilot, a study showed that 30% of Microsoft and 25% of Google's new code is AI generated. So AI is helping in this process already. Developer burnout is a challenge. If you get online, you'll see lots of developers that feel like they're burned out. They're looking at shifting careers, doing other things because it can be a stressful, intensive process. And also, if you're spending a lot of time doing repetitive things or doing things that aren't very interesting, intellectual challenging, it can result in burnout, which hurts retention, output, creativity, things like that. And then last but not least, these days, almost all of our organizations are regulated in some way or the other, whether it's around confidential information or you accept credit cards and there's PCI compliance. Now in AI, there's rules being rolled out in Europe and other places around how to leverage AI safely. And non-compliance is very expensive. And it's very hard to keep up with everything that's out there that we have to adhere to when we're building software. And so that's the goal of Copilot. Copilot's goal is to help us with these things we see on the right, these business things. We'd like to release software faster. We'd like to accelerate the release cycle. We'd like to be able to bring new developers up to speed quicker on our existing code base and our applications. And we'd like to obviously maintain the intellectual property and capital that we have in our staff. And Copilot, as you can see from these stats, helps in all these different ways. So let me real quick show you some of the base capabilities in Copilot. And then we're going to jump into the more interesting adoption issues and some of the advanced capabilities like the new agentic capability that's now in Copilot. So here I have a real simple application. It's a toy, admittedly. It is a web-based application that allows you to sort numbers. And there's 3 different sort algorithms on the back end that are implemented. There's a quick sort, a bubble sort, and a merge sort. And the UI just lets you pick which sorting algorithm you want. It lets you type in a set of numbers to sort and then hit a sort button and it sorts them for you. Real simple, right? But it lets me show some of the features. Base capability of Copilot, the capability everybody's aware of, is really code completion and chat to generate automatically code. All right, so what does that mean real quick? Well, let's say that I would like to add another sort function. I've got quick sort, I've got bubble sort, I've got merge sort. Let's say I wanted to put insertion sort in here. Bring up our chat window. We could type in create a insertion sort function. Hit go. Let's do its thing. It's thinking. And you'll see what it's doing is creating an insertion sort routine. And so I can type chat in here and do that. And then I could just paste it in over here. I could also come over here. I could hit Control I, bring up the inline. I could put the code in there. I could also, in theory, type in some things. Oops, sorry, here we go. I could also type in some stuff, insertion sort, and it'll predict what it is I'm trying to do. And it'll start to guess what it is, and it'll actually predict the code that's coming up next. And you'll see it grays it out, so I can choose it. If I hit tab, it'll select it. I can also scroll through if there's multiple different things, but it basically, as you type, will try to predict what you're trying to do, and it'll put code. I find that using comments to tell it what I'm intending to do is a great way to get Copilot to guess right, if you will. And then you can always just escape out and delete it if you don't want to put it in. I'm not going to put it in because we're gonna use the agentic capability to do something more interesting later. So those are some basic capabilities that Copilot has that pretty much everybody is aware of. The thing, though, is if that's all you know about Copilot, great way to get started. It'll help you out, but it's not going to get you the productivity that you're looking for. All right, and that's because there's challenges with using Copilot across these. I call them the 4 pillars of challenges that you have. There's mindset and trust issues. There's quality of the code that it produces issues. There's security issues, and there's governance issues. So we're going to talk about each of those very briefly, and then we're going to talk about, well, how do you actually deal with those problems? So first of all, mindset and trust challenges. The first one is AI, like any new technology, there's always a fear of some that it's going to impact their job, whether that means their job's going to go away or it's going to change and they don't like change. There's a fear with Copilot and with AI that somehow this is going to impact me and it's not going to be a positive impact, right? So that's the first thing that you hear out there. There are some people that will not use these tools, will not consider these tools because they're worried that they're somehow going to take their job. The second is the exact opposite. Some people are using these tools, but they're just blindly accepting whatever AI gives them as results. We probably all read a marketing piece out on the internet, some story that got written about something that when you read it, you said, oh, AI wrote this, right? Because there's factual issues in there that are just blindly, that are obvious to anybody that knows anything about the subject. The way things are worded looks a little funky, and you just know somebody wrote this with AI and they didn't even bother to review it and fact check it. So we have that problem as well. It's very tempting to use AI as a silver bullet, have it do things for you, and then just do it all for you. And that's a very dangerous thing to do. As mentioned, just viewing a Copilot as a code completion tool or a way to generate code, great first step, but there's so much more to Copilot, and you're going to miss out if you're doing those things. Also, if you don't know how to set context properly, which means kind of give Copilot some hints and ideas about what you're trying to do, and point it to code that is associated with or related to what you're trying to do, then you're probably not going to get good results and you're going to get frustrated. Last but not least, oh, sorry, two things. One is, next one is, oops, sorry. Next one is a lot of people just, organizations buy Copilot, they plop it into IDEs and they tell people go. They don't really give them any training, don't give them any coaching. And so, as mentioned, if you just use the capability that are apparent to you when you look at Copilot, it's going to look useful, but it's not going to be as productive as if you are up to speed on everything that it can provide. And for when we talk to developers during adoption, we do lots of Copilot adoption programs. A lot of times we'll hear, yeah, I tried it, but I didn't get much value out of it, so I don't use it anymore. And that's usually because when you dig into it, they're just using the things that are obvious and look really easy to use, but maybe aren't using Copilot in a full-featured way. Last but not least, all of AI is I call it a Gen AI is a garbage in, garbage out. If you don't prompt well and tell Copilot what you're looking to do or looking for, you're not going to get good results. If you give Copilot a vague description on what you're looking at, don't be surprised when you get vague code back that doesn't meet your needs. So you gotta remember to always prompt these tools very well and specify what you're asking for. And the better you do that, usually the better the results will be. Code quality. All right, so code produced by Copilot doesn't meet your design and coding standards. So this should be of no great surprise. If you understand, Gen AI models and how they're trained, Copilot's base model was trained on open source software. And that open source software came from all over the place with all sorts of design characteristics and coding standards, and quite honestly, if you've ever looked at open source software, there's beautiful, great, well-written open source software out there, and there's horribly written open source software out there. Copilot doesn't know the difference. Copilot, when it was trained, the model was just based on everything it could find and train on. So as you would expect, it's, your results are going to vary. That's also the reason why you get incorrect code, right? Because Copilot doesn't necessarily know what's good and what's bad when it's training, and it's going to be giving you some representation of what it's trained on. And that can vary in terms of quality. And by the way, this is one of the biggest challenges. If you don't figure out how to set context right, you don't figure out how to guide Copilot, you don't figure out how to prompt well, the code you get back, it may actually take you more time to fix the code AI produced than if you had just written it yourself. It's another complaint we hear from developers all the time is I could have written this faster without Copilot. That in some cases is always going to be true because the reality is Copilot is not going to replace you as a developer. However, if you do things properly, Copilot should increase your productivity. And last but not least, related is that because Copilot is trained on everything it can find in repos, open source repos, it's naturally going to generate some code with defects, with security vulnerabilities, code that's not well structured and maintained, and you're going to have to deal with those kinds of issues. The third has to do with security, right? So if you're in a large organization or even a small organization in a heavily regulated environment, which, as I mentioned, more and more organizations are as regulation spreads, you may get some pushback on using Copilot, right? Because of data and intellectual property and security issues, right? Some of those are Obviously, no organization that is building applications, proprietary applications that are intellectual property, want to think that their code is being used in training of future models, because studies have shown, one is you don't know where that data is going if it leaves your your organization, and two is there have been examples of where hackers and attackers have been able to call models and pull out particular information and associate it with particular companies. And that's obviously a concern if there's intellectual property you're trying to protect. So don't think just because training is aggregating information that somehow that doesn't mean that you could have IP challenges, right? So that's one thing you'll hear from your security group or others. The second thing you'll hear is that potentially sensitive corporate information could get exposed by Copilot to other organizations. Your data is being sent somewhere. It's being used for code completion and generation of code and whatnot. And you're not sure who else has access to those particular servers. You're not sure where the data sits, how the data is protected. And there's a concern that you might be exposing corporate information to others. Last but not least, Copilot is a cloud-based solution, and the solution could have vulnerabilities, which could mean someone could attack or exploit these vulnerabilities to get into the Copilot ecosystem and access things that are proprietary to you. Also, there's issues with, is the data encrypted? Where does it live? How do I make sure my data is protected, my source code is protected? We'll talk about some of the solutions for that in a bit. Last but not least is governance, right? Everyone has corporate policies, use policies, how you're allowed to use AI in product development and in your products. And Copilot might not be structured, or usage might not align with your corporate policies. So, obviously we need to make sure that that's the case before you're going to be able to get approval and use Copilot. Generated code might not be compliant with regulatory requirements. If you're in a safety critical, security critical industry, that you've got regulatory requirements, you've got requirements around capturing information about your software development process, your testing process, your security capabilities, and that code is going to play into that and may not be compliant with your regulatory requirements. That's a challenge. It may use people's intellectual property. So what happens if Copilot was trained on open source and that code that was in the open source repository actually wasn't freely available? Maybe it was put there by mistake. Maybe it has licensing that's got some nuances in there, and training of that information resulted in Copilot sometimes generating things that look very similar or even are exactly the same as code somewhere else out there that is not freely available. Does that open you up to intellectual property issues? And then last but not least is, if you're going to spend the time to integrate, put Copilot in place, use Copilot, you want to measure the ROI or value of Copilot, right? You're going to get asked by leadership and management, what's the value of Copilot? What kind of return are we seeing? And one of the things we do as part of our adoption programs at Coveros is to help identify and determine metrics, both leading indicators and trailing indicators, that you can measure to demonstrate the value and ROI of Copilot and show management how it's increasing productivity and enhancing the developer experience. All right, so let's talk about how to overcome these challenges and what does Copilot do and how do you use Copilot to overcome these issues? First one, overcoming mindset and trust challenges. First of all, one critical component is how you socialize the use of GitHub Copilot. And GitHub itself does a very good job in their marketing materials on the Copilot site, if you go to their Copilot website, on discussing how to position Copilot. Copilot is, as GitHub always says, is not an autopilot. It is not the pilot. It is not the person flying the plane. It is an assistant. It is something there to help support you. Think of it as an automated pair programmer or buddy who's looking over your shoulder and helping you build better software. Don't think of it as a people replacer. And socialize it in that way so people don't fear it, and understand that it's here to help and make things better. I think we would all agree at this point, AI is not going away. It'll change and shift, and it's moving very quickly. But because of that, we need to be able to leverage AI to be relevant going forward. And so we need to work to get our staff to understand that Copilot is here to help increase productivity. Now, along those lines, if you say that, then don't turn around the next day and fire 25% of your developers, right? Even if you didn't use these tools as an excuse, that's not going to look very well. So also understand the organization and its intent, and make sure the focus is on using Copilot to make people more productive. The second is, as I alluded to, a little bit of coaching and training can help people who have access to Copilot figure out how to use it and make it productive for them. So they see the value and benefit in using these products and are getting benefit out of it. And last but not least, consider creating some resources that your organization can use to better understand these things. Copilot prompt libraries that describe good prompts that have been used to do various tasks and activities is a great idea. Cheat sheets on how to use Copilot and leverage Copilot. Also, just teach your people how to use Copilot to educate them on Copilot. Copilot is very good at telling you about itself, telling you about the IDE or development environment you're working in and other things around it. So also use the AI capability in Copilot itself to educate you and educate others about how things work. Code quality challenges. So how do you overcome code quality challenges? Well, first, better specify content when generating code. I think we all know at this point how these models work, and that is we prompt a Gen AI model, and along with that model goes some context. That context can be explicit context, so you've pointed it to some files and other things to analyze and give you a response. Or it can be something that's not so obvious. Copilot has a bunch of different ways of showing context, and I'm going to show a couple examples of that in a second. Also, provide your coding standards to Copilot. If you want Copilot to give you things that look a particular way, and you like to structure things or do things a particular way, you can give Copilot that information, and it can support you in that process. Use the code model you believe is best for your application. So Copilot recently opened up and now allows you to pick which models or model you want to use. And for certain types of code, certain types of applications, results have shown that certain models maybe work better than others. And this allows you to pick and choose what you think is best for your particular application. Take advantage of the fact that Copilot generates unit tests automatically. And in fact, through prompting, you can generate almost any kind of test automatically for your code, which is great, right? No excuses to not have tests and even have automated tests when you have an automated capability that can help you in that process. And then last but not least, above and beyond code completion and just chatting about and generating code, Copilot can do lots of other things. It can automatically document your code. If you're new to the code base, you can ask Copilot to explain the code to you. If you don't think it's very good, or you've asked Copilot what Copilot thinks of your code, and Copilot says, I don't think it's very good, and here's how I would refactor it, it can automatically refactor your code, right? So there's lots of ways Copilot can help deal with that. Let me show you a few of those, and just so you have some reference for those kinds of things. So context, so Copilot has five different levels of licenses that you can have. Okay, and this has shifted around recently. There's a free version. It used to only be a limited trial license, but now there is a free version of the product available. You can go out and sign up for it now. It does have pretty severe restrictions on how many chats you can do and how much you can do with the product, because it's really not supposed to be used in a commercial environment. That's the free version. Then there's a pro version. Pro version, I think it's $10 is the current pricing for it. It's for individual users, and it gives you a stepped up amount of capability, both in terms of code completion and chats that you can do. Then you have Pro Plus, which gives you even more capability, but is really for individual users. So you've got three versions that are for individuals if you're just going it alone with Copilot. If you have an organization, a team, an enterprise, and whatnot, you're probably going to want to go with one of the last two. Well, the next one is GitHub Copilot for Business, and that gives you basically the same amount of capability as Pro Plus does, but also allows you to do some team-oriented things, administer the product across a team or teams, et cetera, et cetera. And then last but not least is Enterprise. Enterprise has some additional capabilities above and beyond business that provide you things that you don't have access to in business, which makes it useful for enterprises who really want to take full advantage of the product. All right. Now, in terms of context, whenever you're doing code completion, so I'm in here and I decide I'm going to create a new, and I'm going to say insertions sort in here, sort algorithm, and I'm going to put this in here. What Copilot is doing is it's looking at the code around you or around it. Now, by default, when you're doing code completion, it's looking at any tab that's open in your application, right? That's what it's using as context. So make sure if you're inserting information, or let's say you inserted a sorting algorithm and then you went over to your test file and you wanted to write some tests for this particular function, make sure you have your sorting.py file open as well, and your test file, because it wants the context of being able to see your how you've described and defined your insertion sort in this case when coming up with the tests. All right, so always make sure related relevant files are open in your tabs, okay? And that works across all the different licenses. Now you can take this a step further, because in the higher level licenses, the business and workspace and those at a higher level, you have this ability to add context. So you can explicitly tell it, hey, look at these files, look at this information, point it to particular things that you've defined. Maybe it's coding standards, maybe it's requirements, maybe it's whatever, all sorts of different things that you can point it to and use as context. And if you add that here, it'll automatically then, anytime you do a prompt, send that information in as context as well. All right. You can also define some files in your repo that you can use. So for instance, if you create a file code coding standards, right? And this is a markup description of a basic coding standard. So this is how we want our code to look. If you have this in your repo, it'll automatically use that coding standard and apply it to any code that gets written in your application, right? Whether you have it open or not. You can also define additional kind of configuration files that give Copilot other types of information, okay? The other nice thing is, in the business and enterprise version, is you can also use this at workspace command, which basically says, don't just use everything that's in my workspace, not just tabs that are open, but all the files that are in my workspace, I want you to use as context. And that obviously will broaden what it's looking at, looking to figure out how to give you good information. All right. So those are some of the things you can do. Now, I mentioned you can use different models. One thing that's been rolled out recently is down here is this ability to pick a model. And how many models you have available and which ones they are has to do with which of the different, which of the 5 different tiers of licenses you have. Obviously, as you move toward more capability, you're going to have access to more licenses. But this lets you pick and choose which licenses you actually want to use, or which model you want to use that's under your license. By default, it gives you your GPT models, but there's a whole bunch of other ones you can use, and Cloud Summit's the one I'm using currently. So that lets you basically pick the models that you're interested in using. All right. Now, I mentioned before the ability to do things other than just code completion and things like that. That gets us to some other things that you can do. If you hit slash, these are basically prompts that do different things for you. Slash tests will automatically create tests for code you have highlighted. So that's the way I can easily create tests. Explain will explain anything I have highlighted. Fix will correct errors and issues. You can point to your terminal as well. Tell it there's a bug. So I can tell it terminal. Terminal. And then ask it, please fix the bug or analyze the bug that's in terminal and tell me what the problem is. And Copilot will not only figure out what the problem is, ideally, doesn't always work, but then try to fix it for you and give you an example of what that fix might look like. Right. So those are some of the things you can do to make Copilot more successful and give you better results. All right. All right, IP and data security. The place you want to go is the GitHub Copilot Trust Center. And I've got the URL here. And point your security team to this. If you have additional questions, and sometimes security does, a lot of times as part of our engagements, we will work with the security team to understand Copilot, how it is mitigating the security risks that they have. There is almost always a way to leverage Copilot within the context of your regulatory and compliance requirements. All right. Last resort, recently, Copilot allowed access to local models. And what that means is you can set Copilot up inside of your environment and set it up so that any model that it's accessing is a local model running inside of your environment. And that way, nothing Copilot does leaves your environment in any regard. So if you're not allowed to use the cloud at all, or you're in a classified environment, or you've got other restrictions, there is now a way to set up Copilot. You use things like Ollama, if you're familiar with them. They're just basically conduits to local models. Copilot now integrates with those tools and lets you do things if you just can't figure out a way to overcome some of the security hurdles that maybe your organization has. But in most cases, even large-scale banks, healthcare, medical devices, DoD, defense systems, there's ways around any of the challenges that security comes up with. GitHub is also putting Copilot through a lot of the standard requirements and regulatory certifications. So it's SOC 1, SOC 2, SOC 3 compliant. It's now gone through ISO 27000 kind of security of systems requirements and passed those audits. I know there's work to continually go up the chain in terms of FedRAMP and FISMA types of requirements that sometimes critical systems in DoD and other places have. So those are all either in place or coming soon. Disallowing organizations' code to be trained. So only the free version currently takes your data and puts it into the training process. Pro Plus, Business, and Enterprise, by default now, do not use any of your data as part of its training process. All right. And the last thing is, if you're worried about liability, hey, what happens if that, code that's not supposed to be open source is in the open source? the model gets trained on it, and then the code that Copilot generates looks a lot like something out there that's not supposed to be available. Could I get sued? Well, if you buy the business or enterprise version, you now receive indemnification from any liability of that happening. Caveat, though, is you need to turn on a configuration setting that basically is going to do an extra check of code that gets generated to make sure that code is not doesn't match code that's out there exactly, right? So we're trying to make sure that nothing that got used as training is actually being produced by Copilot and might violate a license agreement. Okay, so there is a way to get yourself indemnified if you use the business or enterprise version of Copilot. Incidentally, I didn't mention earlier when we talked about quality that one thing that Copilot has introduced is before Copilot gives you a set of code, whether it's code completion or it's something in the chatbot, it does analyze that code for known security vulnerabilities and other issues to try to make sure that if there are vulnerabilities or issues in the code that it was trained against, that the code it gives you as your answer doesn't have those issues in it. And that's all done behind the scenes, so you don't see any of that happening, which is really nice. Governance challenges. Okay, so first of all, you're going to want to align Copilot usage with corporate policies, right? So, I mean, a key piece up front, usually in the onboarding process that we're often involved with in companies, is to review corporate policies, make sure everyone is comfortable with what Copilot's going to do with data and how it's going to work, and that it aligns with your capabilities. There is centralized policy management in Copilot, which allows you to turn off and turn off certain characteristics of Copilot, which might solve any problems or concerns that security has. So make sure you use that centralized policy management that comes with business and enterprise. You can also fine-tune models. So GitHub Copilot Business and Enterprise allows you, just Enterprise right now, I believe, allows you to take the base model that comes with Copilot and fine-tune that on your data or further train that on your data so that you get even more accurate code in terms of your particular approach. You can also, as part of that process, do what's called ragging information, which is where you point Copilot to a repository of knowledge or certain files that you want to make sure it considers as part of its context. And it'll automatically combine that data with prompt results and make sure that it's giving you the most accurate information possible. And then in terms of ROI and measuring value, you want to look at leading indicators versus lagging indicators, right? Because we'd like to identify value in Copilot up front. We do that with leading indicators. But over time, we want to see business value. And those are really lagging indicators because they take time to collect and demonstrate, right? So make sure you're using leading and lagging ROI indicators. I just wrote a blog on metrics and ROI, so go to our website if you want to check it out. We help a lot of organizations set that kind of stuff up. All right, so the future. The future is now. If you're not familiar, just recently, it was announced that GitHub Copilot has incorporated an agent mode into the product. And I've been using it now for it's been out maybe a month or so. We had some early access at some point to it as a partner. It's hot is the best way to describe it. And if you're familiar with some of the other agentic types of capabilities out there, where these AI tools are starting to help you plan, execute, and fix problems in a more agent-oriented mode, where they go off and they solve problems and even work together in a multi-agent fashion. That's what Copilot's now providing. And it's opening up, kind of agentic development and testing. You'll hear the term vibe coding. Some people like that. Some people think it's overhyped. Regardless, the whole idea here is to leverage AI to help us build software even more so than code completion and other things. And let me show you real quick the power of doing something like that. So if you come over here and I open up my chat window now, I can type my prompts in here. I can ask it questions. Like I can just say, hi, what do you think? And, say, hey, what do you want to do? I see you've got this application and it has this stuff. And, that's stuff we've always done. But now you can switch modes. Ask is your standard chatbot where you can ask questions, but I can shift into this agent mode. Now, what agent mode is going to do is when I ask it about something, I can ask it more general things, and it's going to go try to figure out everything that needs to be done to do what I want done and come back with an answer and actually do the work. So I'm going to say, please add an insertion sort capability to my application. Now, I'm only going to tell it that. The great thing about agentic capability is give it something, it'll do its thing, it'll come back, it'll explain what it's doing, and then you can tune and adjust as you go if you don't like what it came back. And you'll see it's going to start working on this and adding this capability. While it's doing that, let me pop up and show you one other thing that's hot, that's available now. And this is using Copilot right in your repo. So I'm not in my IDE. I'm over here in my GitHub repo. This is my repository. GitHub, AI Assistant. This is the exact same sorting algorithm that we saw before. One thing I can do now is I can define issues. So let me add an issue here. And I'm going to say add insertion sort is missing from this application, right? That's the issue I want to add. All right. And I'm going to create that issue. Now, once you create the issue, what you'll see is, no, a second. Oopsie. Once I add that issue, go to that issue and code with code agentic mode. All right. I can now change it and assign it to Copilot. So instead of me being assigned and fixing this issue, I can say, well, I'm going to have Copilot fix this issue. So take me out. I want Copilot to fix this issue. And what you'll see is once I do that, Copilot quickly is going to pick it up. So Copilot mentioned this, and it's starting to work on this. So all I have to do is say, hey, Copilot, can you look into this issue and fix it for me? And then I can go off and do something else. Copilot's going to go through here, go through my repository. It's going to create a plan. It's going to create pull requests. And it's not going to do anything without my permission. It's going to write the code. It's going to set up commits. It's going to do everything I want right in my GitHub repo without even being in the IDE. And it'll take a little bit of time to do. So I don't know if it'll be done by the time we finish up here. But it's going to start working on this and coming back with things. And you can actually follow what it's doing. So I can go to view session. You'll see Copilot starting to work on things. And you'll see it's spinning up environment, starting to do its thing. And then it'll start showing you what it's doing. I'll start by exploring the repository. It's looking and viewing the repository, and it'll show you everything it's doing as it does its thing. All right, that's pretty cool. Let's go back here. All right, looks like it came back. Let's see what it did here. So in my chat window, it's going to tell me I'll add an insertion sort function in your application, update the Flask routine to support it. Let me check the exact formatting. I can see insertion has already been added to the Flask routine. Let me verify everything is properly there. It works. Tells you what the insertion sort capability is. It gives you information. It tells you now you have 4 different sorts capability, and you can see that it's added this new capability here, and I can just hit keep. So now it's done that for me. And if I go over to my HTML code, I could then add in here, or I could say, can you also add insertion sort code to my HTML file and my test files? And it'll go ahead and automatically do it for everything that we're talking about here. So you'll see now it's going to add in a capability to, there's a new option for for insertion sort in my UI. It's going to check test files. You'll see if I look over here, I've got some different level of tests. I've got unit tests. I've got some BDD tests, feature tests, user story tests. You'll see it's looking through my tests, and it's adding in a unit test file. So it's adding in anything I need for unit testing. It found a syntax error in the unit test. So it says, well, let me fix that first. So it's fixed a syntax error that I put in there to see if it would catch it, right? Because that's the other thing it's doing. As it's adding code, it's not just adding it blindly. It's analyzing it, rerunning it, checking it. If it finds problems, it's fixing it, and trying to come up with a workable solution automatically using agents. And you'll see it's chugging along doing its thing. So that gives you an idea of what's capable now in Copilot that we didn't even have a quarter ago. And now it's looking at the BDD feature files and adding in, it's going to add into my feature file description of my user stories, and it's going to add in tests to my particular application. So doing all that for me automatically. That's hot. Let's go over here and see what we're doing over here. Yeah, so you see now it's starting to check existing tests, understanding test structures. It's inserted the code. You can see that GitHub Copilot is buzzing along, and then it's checking and retesting things to make sure everything's working. It's giving me an entire list of everything it's doing that's available. And it's mentioned once it's finished, it's going to give me all the approvals that I need to do to walk through, code review everything, check everything in, write commit comments, and do everything you need to do to add this capability right directly into my repo. All right, so that's where Copilot is headed. As you see from that GitHub repo capability, one of the things that Copilot is expanding itself out to be an end-to-end software development agentic capability. And it works best. I always get this question. It does work best if you're using the GitHub ecosystem. So you are a GitHub Enterprise customer, your code is in a GitHub repo, and all that stuff is integrated together. But it does work with other solutions as well. So there is capability and integration with Azure DevOps, since of course Microsoft owns GitHub. So there is there is integration into Azure DevOps. You can obviously use Copilot for other ecosystems as well. They're just not going to be as fully integrated. In fact, Copilot is best integrated into GitHub, as you would imagine, second best into Azure DevOps, as you can imagine, and then integrated into other environments. Less of an integration, but still works just fine. All right, so just a little bit of wrap up, and we'll take questions and talk about next steps. I mentioned to the fact that at Coveros we do lots of GitHub adoptions, Copilot adoptions, and we have a 5-step model that we go through. When we come into an org, first thing we just try to figure out is, well, what's the organization trying to do with Copilot? How are they trying to use it? Are you building new code? Are you refactoring code? Are you migrating code? Are you modernizing code? Because how you use the product is probably going to differ based on those different use cases. And we can strategically work with you to figure that out. Make sure that security and risk management and governance are good with the product, and that it's set up properly to be able to use inside of your compliance and regulatory context. Then we help plan out an adoption program. We are big fans of piloting, which means starting one place, getting one team or a small set of teams up to speed. That involves training, coaching, hands-on support, and then rolling that out over time across the organization to all your teams, all the while measuring adoption, right? That's the key. Measuring and showing that this product is being adopted and it's being used, because you wouldn't expect the organization to invest in additional licenses across the org if they're not seeing the value in those things. So an integrated metrics program into all of this. And then as new features like this agentic capability come out, and you want to leverage them, it's good to have someone, a partner, who is getting early access to what's coming down the pike, understands it the day it hits the street, at least even in preview, and can work with you to figure out how to put that new capability and get people on teams trained and up to speed on those new capabilities so they're being used effectively. This entire process, by the way, fits into the GitHub Copilot adoption framework that GitHub has rolled out. So onboarding is really our first two steps. Adoption is really step 2 and 3. In our model, optimize is 3 and 4, a little bit of 5, and sustainment is 5. And this shows you in more detail the types of things that are typically being done. And we can go into this in much more detail if you're interested offline. There are some good exit criteria defined as to what your goal is going to be at these various levels. And this gets back to tracking adoption rates and ROI and value as you're moving through this process. And real quick, a case study, just so you see this in action, is we recently worked with a leading global real estate service company. They're trying to figure out how to optimize their DevSecOps processes in general, streamline workflows, and leverage AI. And so we brought Copilot into the process. We also helped them move to and better use GitHub Enterprise in general. And we built some customized training that was not just out of the box Copilot and GitHub training, but was tuned and tailored to their particular application, to their particular environment. Above and beyond the training, we provided hands-on support, individual coaching, team coaching, enterprise coaching. You want everybody up the chain to understand what's being done with Copilot and show its benefits, because obviously that's the way you can continue to leverage these tools, as if the organization's keeping them around because they're showing value. We did seamlessly migrate data and information and functionality into GitHub from a legacy platform. And we also worked to integrate GitHub Advanced Security, which is a great security solution, into the process as well. And one great thing is that Copilot works very closely with GitHub Advanced Security. As GitHub Advanced Security finds security vulnerabilities, you can use Copilot to automatically diagnose, triage, and remediate those problems for you, just like we saw with the agentic capability, so that you can automatically fix problems that you find. For anybody that's done security remediation work, it is tedious and painful. We often push it out because it gets in the way of new feature capability, but that adds risk to our org. This is a way to kind of have your cake and eat it too. We saw some great results. We saw a 600% increase in Copilot usage in this organization. We got the organization up to 90% adoption across their developers in an eight-week period. And about 20% of the lines that were being generated either through chat or through code completion were accepted, which is pretty good, right? I mean, you're not going to accept everything because, as mentioned, if you don't give it enough context or whatnot, It's gonna, first guess might be wrong. If you keep typing though in code completion, it's gonna figure out what you're doing and then give you something to accept. So that's a pretty good percentage. So with that, if you're interested in help with Copilot, reach out to us, schedule a consultation, and we're certainly happy to help. We do have a couple minutes for questions, Todd, if any of them popped in or anybody has anything that they want to specific questions they want to get answered.
Yeah, I'm just working
We're
my way
about right
back.
on time.
Just working my way back from what we received. So here's one. How far can Copilot assist with software design, such as adherence to object-oriented principles or suggesting a proper design pattern for a specific use case?
Great question. Great question. Yeah. So initially, I felt like from a design perspective, all the products in this space were not very good. But once context, you started to be able to define context. You can, in your coding standard, not only put coding types of guidance, but put design types of guidance too. And Copilot will take that guidance into consideration. Is it perfect? Absolutely not, right? But it also helps if your code that you have is structured the right way. It's going to give it a big hint when it reads a design, right? A design rule about, a particular design pattern or set of patterns or, whatever methodology you like to follow. And the code that you already have matches it, because then it's got a context document and it's got code that is a good example. And that's where these tools really shine, is when they have a good example and they have a definition of what, the right structure is. So I've seen it improve quite a bit. It's not perfect, but it has come a long way in the last couple of years.
Great. And then there was just another question up front. I'm not sure if this got answered or not, but we'll still ask it. Where else can we
Yeah.
use the Copilot? Where else can we use Copilot other than Visual Studio?
Yeah, so they do support, GitHub supports quite a few of the modern software development IDEs, the IntelliJ set of IDEs. I mentioned Azure DevOps and integration into some of the IDE capability there. There is a list if you go to the Copilot site of the supported IDEs that they now, they have, and they definitely support. I wouldn't say all of the IDEs, but most of the major ones are now being supported, and I know they're working on more.
Great. That's all the questions we have, Jeff. So I think we're all set to conclude.
Awesome. Well, thanks everybody. Appreciate you all coming. If you have any other questions, definitely reach out to us. We'd be more than happy to help them or answer them for you and help.